Is our second largest business here in Michigan, and we're going to hear today from business owners who are dependent on our environment. But I think it's also important to say that many of us are personally dependent upon our environment, not just for our life, not just for our health, but also for what makes our hearts sing, right? Why do we live here in Michigan? Why do we love to be here? We love to be here because of its clean water, because of the beautiful rivers, because of these great lakes which are unique in the world. And our environment is not just essential to our economy, but it's essential to our lives in so many ways. And so we're here to call for improvements to our polluter accountability laws. We think that we can improve the cleanups themselves. We think that the public has a right to know and deserves more transparency. And we also think that there are ways we can prevent adding more orphaned contaminated sites to our state's large inventory of orphaned contaminated sites. So the history here is that once upon a time, Michigan had a great polluter pay law that was very, very strong. But then in 1994, under Governor John Engler, that law was upended. And it was changed from really a polluter accountability law where polluters were required to clean up their mess to an exposure management law. And that's why we're making a proposal here today with this polluter pay package to increase the quality of those cleanups, to require that when Eagle is managing these cleanups, when our environmental cop is on the beat, that they have more tools to enforce better cleanups. Let me give you one emblematic example. Right now, what happens all over Michigan when pollution is found in our water or land is that companies are allowed to just walk away and employ something called institutional controls. This just basically means no one's allowed to touch that resource anymore. What our bills do is our bills say, let's make removing the pollution a priority. Let's give the environmental regulators the authority to say, no, this is a situation where that pollution can be removed so it doesn't bedevil future generations, rather than just being capped and monitored and left behind for future generations to deal with. Our legislation also dramatically increases transparency. The public has a right to know, and one emblematic example of what we're doing in that space is ending the secret cleanups. Many people in Michigan don't know that there's an element of our law that allows a polluter to never tell the state about the pollution that they've found and to just work on it on their own. We need to end these secret cleanups. The neighbors have a right to know. Eagle has a right to know. The people of Michigan have a right to know. And the final big element of what we're trying to pull together today is to fill some of the loopholes in our laws that cause us to have this amazing inventory of contaminated sites here in the state of Michigan. We have about 27,000 contaminated sites in our state. Over 13,000 of those are abandoned, orphaned sites. What that means is that the polluter has walked away, leaving the taxpayer to hold the bag. Not only are they leaving that expense for our taxpayers, but they're also leaving that pollution behind for the neighbors to deal with, and it affects their health. And so what we're proposing is to require financial assurances from businesses that are likely to leave behind a legacy of pollution. Just like we do with landfills, we should give Eagle the authority to identify sectors that are likely to leave behind orphan sites and require them to have bonding or insurance, some sort of backstop, so that the taxpayers aren't left holding the bag, and so that those neighbors have some assurance that that site could get cleaned up along the line. So there's a lot of bills here. I didn't want to go into too much painstaking detail, but those are the broad themes. And I'm really gratified to have so many of my colleagues here today. This is a busy day in Lansing, but this is a crucial issue. And when you talk to voters all over the state of Michigan, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Youpers, trolls, everybody supports clean water. Everybody wants to make sure that the people who leave behind a mess are required to clean it up. And so with that, I want to hand the microphone over to my colleague and friend, Representative Jason Morgan, to talk some more about some of the bills in the package. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. I am very proud to be standing up here with you today and to be working on this really important issue with you. My name is Jason Morgan, and I represent portions of Washtenaw, Wayne, and Oakland counties. We've seen the impacts of contamination from polluters in my district and in our community. Like the Gelman toxic chemical plume, which has slowly been inching toward our groundwater, through our groundwater to our drinking water supply. This plume has been expanding since the 80s, costing taxpayers money and risking their health. We are not alone in this situation. Michiganders across the state have to grapple every day with contaminated land, air, and water. There are over 24,000 contaminated sites in Michigan, and that is just the confirmed amount. There are likely many more. Since the 90s, polluting corporations and special interests have spent millions of dollars to gut Michigan's pollution laws. Since then, funding for environmental cleanups has suffered, and the costs of pollution have been paid by Michiganders, our wildlife, and our future generations. Those tricks won't work anymore. Michigan's environment and the health of its people will not be bought. There's growing demand from our constituents, and the people across our state, who are expecting folks in office to do a better job holding polluters accountable to clean up their messes. A recent poll from August found 95% of Michiganders support requiring corporations to pay to clean up their own messes, and 92% support reinstating our polluter pay laws here in our state. These are staggering numbers of public support, emphasizing the point Senator Irwin made that all people in our state support ensuring a clean environment. So we are here today to introduce this important package of bills to get Michigan back on track, being the state that respects its people and the environment, while also being a great place to do business. In many cases, when the state is trying to go after polluters responsible for legacy contamination that happened years ago, we run into issues where the 6-year statute of limitations has passed. Under the Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act, Michigan can seek damages from polluters for cleanup costs, but those claims are limited to 6 years after state-approved cleanup activities started the site, and no claims can be made from before 1991. House Bill 5243 would start a new 6-year clock for remediation claims related to previously unregulated hazardous substances like PFAS, so we can work to clean up contaminated sites from these harmful chemicals. Furthermore, House Bill 5244 would create a fairer system for people who have been impacted by pollution, starting the clock for bringing claims against polluters when the person discovers or should have discovered the problem. And finally, people who are exposed to pollution are at risk of health complications, and sometimes those complications take years to develop. House Bill 5241 would allow someone exposed to high levels of pollution to sue the polluter to cover the costs of medical monitoring for conditions linked to exposure to those pollutants. Current law provides no resources for people until after they are diagnosed with a disease, which at that point can often be too late. This bill will help protect the health of people, catch health complications from pollution before it's too late. These bills are about protecting Michiganders and giving them the tools to hold polluters accountable for the impacts that they cause to them and their families. All Michiganders deserve to live healthy lives and should be empowered to hold polluters accountable. The bottom line is this: if you are responsible for causing pollution, you should have to pay to clean it up. This legislation makes it clear that fencing off land and closing drinking water wells is not a substitute for removing as much pollution as possible. Let's reclaim our state and ensure polluters and not taxpayers pay to clean up their messes. Thank you so much, and I will turn it over to whoever's at the I believe Sandy, but Rep. McKinney is running a little late due to the great work in our roads happening right now. All right, so I will introduce Sandy Wynn-Stelt.
right? I'm pretty flexible, I'll just say. What the heck? My name is Sandy Wynn-Stelt, and I am not a legislator. I am, in fact, an impacted citizen and a co-chair of the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. This is very personal to me. My story started in 2016 when my husband Joel passed away of liver cancer. And it was the following year that I learned we had been drinking contaminated groundwater from the Wolverine Worldwide dump that we had no idea was there. And that's impacted 25 square miles of my community. At that time, my first question was, how does this happen in our state, this pure Michigan state? And that was when I started learning how poor our environmental rules were. And that became this journey where I ended up being this, I don't know, reluctant, begrudging activist. I didn't want to do it, but somebody had to. There is no reason under the sun why my husband should have died because a company could make profits. And there is no reason under the sun why the children in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods throughout Michigan are breathing poor air and drinking bad water so that shareholders can have good dividends. And there's no reason why my tax money and your tax money isn't going for schools or for police or for roads. And instead it's got to go for environmental cleanup while CEOs make great stock options and get junior achievement awards. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You can't be drunk enough to make this story make any sense. This medical monitoring piece is very close to me. When this happened, besides losing my husband, I paid out of pocket for my blood to be tested. It was $800 because it's not covered. Thankfully, I did, because I had a physician who monitored my health quite closely and discovered that I had developed thyroid cancer. And I was able to get surgery and hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be moving forward. I'm pretty much flame resistant and water repellent. What's going to kill me, right? So I just want to thank everybody back here who has worked tirelessly on that, on all of this. This is not a close call, I don't think. I don't know how you argue against holding people accountable. Every 3-year-old in this state this morning learned if you made a mess, you cleaned it up. So I think it's time that corporations do too. Thank you. And now I'll hand it over to Mom.
Thank you, Sandy. My name is Molly Maciejweski, and I'm the Water Treatment Services Manager for the City of Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor's drinking water treatment plant serves more than 140,000 people in Ann Arbor and its surrounding townships. We take great pride in providing safe, affordable water to our customers in our community. But the cost to treat the water and to provide the water is largely dependent on the quality of our source water, which is the Huron River. Over the last several years, detections of PFAS in the Huron River from a point source polluter, basically one polluter, has contaminated the river and forced the City of Ann Arbor to install treatment to clean up the PFAS. City of Ann Arbor also faces ongoing operational and maintenance costs associated with that treatment. Ann Arbor's drinking water source also faces threat of contamination from a decades-old plume of groundwater contaminated with 1,4-dioxane that was never properly cleaned up by the polluter. And when we're talking decades, we're talking about starting in the 1980s, which is older than a lot of you in the room, right? So this has been going on forever, and we are still fighting to get that cleanup. Ann Arbor Water spends ratepayer dollars right now to monitor the migration of that plume and to research ways to treat and remove that dioxane should it ever reach our source. That's just not right. This pollution really needs to be addressed and cleaned up at its source by the polluter, not by downstream communities like Ann Arbor. And Michigan really needs this legislation, and Ann Arbor supports it. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Tami.
Hello, my name is Tami Parks. I own Great Lakes Clothing Care in Holland, and I'm also a member of the Great Lakes Business Network, a coalition of businesses committed to protecting our air, land, and water. I'm a third-generation clothing care professional. Both my grandparents and my parents operated dry cleaning plants in Holland. Sadly, the dry cleaning industry has a history of pollution due to harmful chemicals and known carcinogens used in the process. That's why I decided to transition to 100% wet cleaning, which is an eco-friendly alternative to dry cleaning that uses water and biodegradable detergents to clean garments and textiles. Wet cleaning decreases the chance of harmful chemicals leaching into our ecosystems and water. As a small business owner, I see it as my responsibility to serve my community and customers with an excellent product while operating in a sustainable way to preserve our small and large ecosystems for generations to come. My business operates less than 5 miles from the shore of Lake Michigan. The lake is my daily reminder of a responsibility to care for that shoreline, that lake, and all the Great Lakes surrounding our great state and beyond. Today, I challenge other businesses to take on that mantra because communities, schools, churches, small businesses all need clean air and water. The Polluter Pay package is important to hold accountable bad actors that don't want to play by the rules and are harming Michigan communities and our health. It is important so new businesses can be assured their properties are safe and they're not inheriting a problem. I support holding accountable polluters and protecting the things that make Michigan great, our pristine lakes and rivers, world-class forests, and vibrant communities. We don't have to choose between a strong economy and a safe and healthy environment. The two depend on each other. I believe that if you are operating a business in Michigan and you make a mess, you should be held responsible to clean it up. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Marshall Kilgore.
Right. Good morning. My name is Marshall Kilgore. I serve as the Director of Engagement for the West Michigan Environmental Action Council. WILX has been a leading resource for environmental advocacy and education since 1968. At WILX, we are working hard to combat environmental injustice toward our frontline communities that are often the most marginalized and forgotten about. We are proud to support the Polluter Pay package as we know we will help right the wrongs of the past and lead us toward a future of environmental justice for all of us. This issue hits home for many West Michiganders and for me personally. Southeast Grand Rapids residents are still grappling with the legacy issue of vapor intrusion. It's wonderful that I got to go after Tami, a business owner in the dry cleaning industry that is doing the important work to change and right the wrongs of the past. Because I'm going to tell you a little bit about negative dry cleaners in the past who have done some negative things that affect us till this day. Dry cleaners of the past were not responsible and used large quantities of cancer-causing chemicals known as PCE or PERC, which is a dry cleaning fluid and industrial degreaser. One of the most dangerous examples of vapor intrusion in Grand Rapids took place in the heart of the Madison Square neighborhood. Of course, a predominantly black neighborhood. The vapor intrusion site was the same street of my mom's community office where she works as a juvenile probation officer, and I visited her for over a decade. And I recently bought my first home 5 minutes away. 28 individuals who worked in the area affected by vapor intrusion had to take blood tests, as Sandy talked about, which we pay out of our own pockets, to see the level of PERC within their blood. A large number of them showed dramatically higher than allowable levels of cancer-causing chemical in their blood. In addition to the direct impact this vapor intrusion had on workers in the area, there were also folks living at the sites of contamination. So they were displaced for weeks while testing and remediation was done. This was inconvenient for residents. So maybe they could, if they were lucky, stay with a relative, or they had to stretch their budget even further to find a hotel. It is ridiculous, ludicrous, to require the taxpayer, some of whom have been directly affected, had to pay for blood tests out of pocket, had to relocate, to pay for this environmental injustice and solve a problem they did not create. That's the point here, folks, of why we're all here today. It is not correct to solve a problem in which you did not create. We owe it to our fellow Michiganders, my neighbors, my loved ones to hold polluters responsible. In doing so, we will protect the Great Lakes, our amazing forests, and finally, in 2023, show our frontline communities, communities of color, disadvantaged communities that we care and we will protect them and uplift environmental justice. Thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Representative Donovan McKinney.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Donovan McKinney. I'm the state representative out of Michigan's 14th House District that's located in Northeast Detroit, parts of Warren, and all of the city of Centerline. Glad to be here this morning. So we're just here to talk about polluter pay. So contamination from corporate polluters is an issue of environmental justice. In my community in particular, I have 7 Chrysler Stellantis facilities. I have, just bordering my district, GM Tech Center, a plethora of suppliers and part suppliers and things of that nature. My district is heavily industrial. I want to share a story about my late father-in-law, Robert Lattimore Sr. He grew up, born and raised in Dublin, Georgia, small little town between Macon and Savannah in Georgia. It's literally so small they only have one traffic light still. But he recently passed away in August from ALS. And literally he did a short stint in the military, Army. He was drafted in the Army at that era and at that time, and he was honorably discharged, and he ended up, after the military, wanted to relocate to the city of Detroit. A lot of African Americans at that time migrated north for jobs and opportunities, especially when it comes to the economy and economics. And guess where he ended up? Like a lot of people who migrated to Detroit, he ended up at the plant, Chrysler facility, the old 8-mile and Mound engine plant in my district. He worked there for 31 consecutive years. And when that plant shut down in the early 2000s, he retired back home. But he told me stories right before he died about the pollutants, the pollution, and especially the chemicals he was exposed to in the plants. Now, granted, the plants have done their due diligence over time, and they're providing more worker safety, and they're not exposed to as many contaminants, so to speak, inside the facility. But outside of the facility, our communities are subjected and degraded to a lot of pollution. And if you look at his story and you look at my community's story, you'll be surprised the connection. When I was knocking doors last year campaigning for this seat, I was knocking doors and I was talking to a lot of my elders in the community, and they told me a lot of the respiratory pulmonary diseases they develop over time. Growing up, living next door to all of these plants, right? We see the smokestacks. We still see them. I literally left this morning. That's why I was late to this press conference today, because of the day on truck traffic and the construction. We're fixing the roads, by the way. But I want people to be patient, but that's why I'm a little late today. But I have to really, you got to understand the connection. And when I tell my community that, especially when COVID hit, and we got to remember this, and I got to give a shout out to our Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist and everybody who led that racial disparities task force, because COVID-19 impacted communities across the state, but more importantly, it had a disparity, literally impacting people of color, in particular black folks who live in these overburdened, polluted communities, like a Detroit. And so if you look at COVID and the way it attacked your respiratory system, we have people in our communities that had pre-existing conditions, didn't even know it. And there's studies right now, there's stats right now. There's some zip codes in Detroit and the metro area that are worse off than LA, more polluted than anywhere else in the nation. There's also a stat I was recently reading in my district in northeast side of Detroit. If your child grows up in my district, by the time they hit the age of 5 years old, they have a 70% chance of developing asthma. So this is what we're talking about. Our corporate polluters must pay. They must share this burden, and they must ensure that the public safety and public health of our communities are intact. And I just want to say this, I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues. I could not be here with a lot of our partners in the room, but this is life or death. Literally, I got people in my communities who are starting to develop MS and ALS and don't really understand the connections until we let them know what's going on and educate them that it's all about the environment. It's about what we grew up in. It's about what surrounds us. It's about what we breathe, what we drink every single day, what we eat. This dictates our health and really the vitality of how long we live. And so I want to make sure that with these bills and other bills too, because this is part of it. This is one step. But we need also more bills, and we're working on more legislation too, to make sure the holistic approach. Everybody has the opportunity to live a quality of life that they justly deserve. And so I just want to leave it there, and I want to thank everybody for being here today. And yeah, we'll just leave it there. God bless
So thank you so much, Representative McKinney. Thank you to Representative Brayback and Representative Jimmy Wilson Jr., Representative Cerniglou, Representative Conlin, Senator Schenck, Representative Hood, and also Representative Colazar was here earlier. And I really want to thank Representative McKinney for bringing us back to what this is all about. This is about people's health. We're not just up against pollution. We're not just up against these shuttered sites and these fenced off pieces of land. We're up against cancer. We're up against a foe that has taken loved ones from probably every single person in this room. And so this is an important issue. Thank you for being here. And if there are any questions, I'm sure that one or more of us would be eager to take them.
I'll start. So one of the concerns with the previous polluter pay package was that there would be all these sites or properties that, because the standard is so high, they don't get cleaned up and they just end up kind of like blight in communities and an issue for economic development. Do you address that in this package, and if so, how?
Yeah, so I'll say two things about that. If anybody else wants to add, please do. One is that whenever here in the legislature we talk about doing anything good for the environment or for workers, we tend to hear from the Chamber of Commerce and other groups that represent businesses saying that any improvement in the lives of our citizens will put us out of business, and so please don't do it, right? And so first off, I just want to call out the fact that any time we make even a modest proposal for improvement, that's what gets thrown at us as though it's true. It's not. The other thing I'll say is that, yes, this package was developed precisely with that in mind. We do not go to a strict liability regime. Instead, we maintain the current regime that allows baseline environmental assessments and liability shields for successor property owners. But we also put more tools in place for the regulators to say, in certain circumstances, pollution has to actually be removed rather than just cordoned off and resources prohibited to public use. Things like that. So we're talking about small, modest, but important improvements to the quality of cleanups and the transparency in the system. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add. Senator Irwin and I serve as the chairs of the Budget in Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy in our respective chambers. And I would say that the state has stepped up in remarkable ways to help address pollution across the state with historic investments in brownfields cleanup. And what we're asking here is for our corporate partners to join us and to match that effort in federal and state dollars and to pay their part. And we are not going to stop investing in cleanups. We absolutely have to do that for the purposes outlined for public health, for economic development and growth in our communities, to improve quality of life in our communities. But we need help. The resources that we receive from the federal government, while historic, were simply a down payment on billions and billions of dollars of legacy contamination that we're challenged to deal with. We cannot do this work alone, and corporate partners have to stand up now. There's just no question. We're going to do our best, but we need help. Thank you.
Yeah, I just also want to stop my feet and repeat something that was said previously here today, but also was said by the governor few weeks ago when she made her What's Next speech. The environment and the economy work together, not against each other. And it's not a direct quote, of course, but that's a theme that I think a lot of us believe strongly that we'll do better by doing well.
How many of these secret sites are out there? Well, and can you describe that more? Where they do?
Well, we don't really know. They're secret.
Yes. So how do you know they're out there? What are they?
Well, because it's in the law, and it speaks to these self-managed cleanups, these secret cleanups in the law, and we know that there are responsible parties, we'll call them this time, who are out there engaging in these types of cleanups. And so, we find out about them later when either we find out that there's a problem they didn't attend to, or when they try to get that site closed.
And then, how does the package deal with a situation where a company says, okay, but we don't have the funds for this? So you've got this gap between where, let's say, all of this gets enacted into law. There'll be this bond and assurance that would theoretically help pay for future pollution. But what about now, where companies will say, we simply can't afford it, you're going to put us out of business, so it'll just be an orphaned, abandoned site?
I'm not really sure about the scenario that you're constructing, Zach, right? I mean, are we talking about a responsible party who is still operating on the land that they polluted and now are trying to continue to operate?
Not a successor.
Well, in that case, they would already be required to clean up, and these bills might require them to do a little bit more in their cleanup. And I think that right now, what's the problem is that their community and their neighbors are looking at that cleanup saying, this isn't sufficient. This isn't getting the job done. This is spreading cancer and cost to our community, and you need to step up. And so I think that by requiring bonding and insurance, we can prevent more of these kinds of situations that you're talking about arising. But it's a very real problem when companies create problems that are bigger than they can manage. Sorry. One more thing I'll say is that it's interesting, right? When people commit other types of crimes, I've never heard someone say, "What if we throw the burglar in jail? They won't be able to continue their trade."
I'd like to just leave it there because I think that's But I think one of the key parts of this is looking into the future and supporting our environment and kids and future generations. So making sure that we put a stop to orphan sites and situations like what you're talking about. So the aspect of it requiring assurances that the company would be able to clean up into the future if they were to pollute, that is really important. We hope Michigan has a long future of good jobs in manufacturing in our state. But that only works if those jobs in that manufacturing are not causing us to lose really important pieces of our land and our environment and access to safe drinking water. So that's one of the big keys in this package, is making sure that we are putting a sort of drawing a line in the sand now and saying we will not have future orphaned, polluted sites where there's nobody who can afford to clean it up. We have to make sure that we stop it now as we work to improve standards for what the current cleanups are happening.
How much financial assurance is enough, and what industries do you start with?
So I don't know, right? This is going to be something that we're going to empower Eagle to work on and develop over time. But this is a system that we already use for landfills. So we've already recognized that landfills are likely to have big problems, and that those big problems need big answers. And so we've already required bonding and insurance for them. We're asking Eagle to apply this same approach to another set of businesses, which basically are businesses that have to file a certain paperwork around their industrial chemicals. I think it's called the Industrial Pretreatment Program, if memory is serving, and then also dry cleaners. And so that's the set of businesses that would be, that the Eagle would be looking at and saying, it probably makes sense on some level to have some sort of backstop here.
I just had a question related to something Representative Morgan said earlier, kind of about how these bills would provide citizens with additional options, kind of empower them in certain areas. I know one of the things that was touched on was the medical monitoring. Does this do anything else additional to kind of help the citizens that might be impacted by these chemicals?
Actually,
Well, I'm not
Say-
I'm not bragging, but I'm not a lawyer or a lawmaker. But I think one of the things that this will do, that I feel very strongly about, is help us with that statute of limitations. Oftentimes, citizens are left with no legal recourse because the contamination occurred years ago. And so, like in my, instance, PFAS, you don't taste it, smell it, you don't know about it until the polluter has tried to clean it up poorly. And then it finally comes through. So I'm hoping between the medical monitoring and statute of limitations, citizens are finally going to have a way as well to get to just be made whole. That's all we want.
right, I think the key is making sure we're catching these things early. As somebody who's lost many family members to cancer, and understanding Sandy's story, you have to catch these illnesses early if you're going to save people's lives. And so that's a critical component of it. That by extension would lead us to being able to treat these folks and get them the support that they need, hopefully in time to help save their lives.
What kind of relationship would a company have to have with the site in order to be a responsible party? Is it just owner or is it beyond that?
So, not a lawyer either, not bragging, but I have read this one many times. My understanding of it is that you're a responsible party if you were the entity that caused the pollution. You own the property, you're operating there, you caused the pollution, you're now the responsible party. What happens a lot of times is that those responsible parties end up going bankrupt. I think of like McLeod Steel, for instance. Once, a giant steel, company, big plant in Trenton, and now it's still there. And it's still sitting on the Detroit River, and I mean, there's more going on with that site now lately. But once again, that's an example of a responsible party that has now left an orphan site behind. What happens a lot of times though is that you'll get a responsible party, but then maybe a successor owner might be involved as well. And so that's why we use that term responsible party to distinguish between the folks who might have bought the property after the pollution was caused.
Who are I'm going to guess Wolverine Worldwide would certainly be one of the actors that would be kind of inspiring this legislation, but what other bad actors are out there when you think, like, this is case in point why this legislation is needed?
I mean, I don't know if anybody else, I feel like I'm taking up a lot of time here, but I'm hearing company names coming out. I mean, the issue is that if you look at this map over here, there are contaminated sites in every corner of the state. Where there are people, there are contaminated sites. I mean, right here in Lansing, there was the old motor wheel site. I live in Ann Arbor, where we talk a lot about the Gelman Sciences plume, which I think is a perfect example of how lax environmental cleanup standards ended up with a problem for the public that was much greater than it ever had to be. We've heard about Wolverine Worldwide and the issues with PFAS in Rockford, in Parchment, issues with PFAS in Ann Arbor, issues with PFAS all over the place, right? We had the hexavalent chromium spill last year from Tri-Bar Plating in Wixom, which is one of my favorites because they're the ones that was sending PFAS downriver for my kids, right? And then I think it's also important to say that one of the reasons why a policy like this that is supported by such a huge percentage of the public isn't already law is because literally the most powerful entities in the state don't want this to happen, right? And I hate to say these names because they're the ones who are going to make it difficult for us to get this done, but the big three are a part of this. The big three have a legacy of pollution in this state that they need to step up and be more responsible for. I think those companies are trying to turn a corner and they're trying to live a different life going forward. But that doesn't change the fact that they've left behind a lot of really grisly sites all over our state. And in Milan, in my district, is another one where there's a Ford plant that's causing problems, right? We look at entities like Dow, one of the biggest chemical companies in the entire world. They do a lot of business in Michigan. I think that they could continue to do business in Michigan in a very environmental way, and I think the leadership of Dow wants to do that. But let's be real. There is a legacy there that needs to be dealt with. And then there are legions of small suppliers and all over the state that this will affect. And let's not leave out the utilities, right? There's PCBs all over the state. And so, anyway, the list goes on.
Good point. You just mentioned the people who are extremely skilled at stopping legislation. So how are you possibly going to overcome that?
Well, what I'm hopeful for is that, and if others have answers, is that the power of the people will come to bear. This is something that the public strongly supports. The public supports polluter accountability. The public hates cancer. So we should be able to come together on this issue in the legislature. But I don't want to be glib about the fact that there are powerful opponents, and those powerful opponents have real reasons to want balance and carefulness in this space. And I think that if you look at the proposal that we put forward, it's reflective of a balanced and careful approach. One that is meant to allow Michigan to be the place where we build the cars of the future, but to do it in a way that's better for our environment and better for the future generations who have to live down the river.
I just want to add, I think one of the keys that we went into working on this legislation over the last many months was with the mindset that we are trying to set clear rules and cleanup standards that will ensure that our environment gets cleaned up, but not in a way that has a substantially negative impact on the businesses that we want to be here. So we've been meeting with stakeholders in the business community as well, hearing that feedback, talking about other pieces that we perhaps would have wanted to include in this package that we thought, let's put forward something that is very pragmatic and sensible and sets clear rules looking forward while getting some better cleanup in the meantime to make sure that we are preventing future pollution and still supporting and working with these industries in our state. That is the key. It's not to introduce a sort of messaging bill or anything like that. We've painstakingly gone through state law to say, how do we make sure we're cleaning up our state, setting clear, reasonable rules, and then working with our environmental and business community to figure out an amicable way to do that. So my hope is that they'll work with us, but ultimately the people, I believe, are on our side. The people of our state absolutely want a cleaner state and would be with us on this. So our hope is to get that support and to have residents speak to their legislators, reach out, and demand that we do the job that we are sent here to do in protecting our residents and our environment in our state.
Can I just add one last thing? Really appreciate, you guys explained it pretty well. Love my colleagues. But Senator Irwin touched on this point, and legacy pollution. But we understand that climate change is here. This is a crisis that's happening every single day. And so climate change is exacerbating the legacy pollution that is going on in all of our communities. And I just want to point out, earlier this year, over the spring and summer with the Canadian wildfires that came across over to the state, guess what happened? We were rated as the worst air pollution in the world. Not the country, but the world, multiple days in a row. And literally people are walking around like they had to go to work. They had to do whatever. They were working like it was day to day, which is true. The world doesn't stop, but people are breathing in these toxins. And we don't know what that would do long term. The science is saying something right now. We can look at the data, but right now we don't know what it's going to do to all of us, because we were in Lansing when that happened. And we're breathing this stuff. You guys are breathing this stuff. So we have to really look at this, and this is one of many steps we need to look at. Another thing we need to do, and I want to put that out there, is look at cumulative impacts. This is a whole nother issue. But this is just one of many we're going to be working on. And I just appreciate to be a part of this and support this package, because this is way needed. We're long overdue for this. Long overdue.
Representative, I want to talk about a little bit. We talked about industry and how folks within the industry are going to push back on some of this package a little bit here. But I don't want us to forget that folks within industry and that drive our economy. I come from Grand Rapids, beer city. We used to be furniture city. You cannot have good beer without good water. There are folks who drive this economy who do want clean water and who do want positive environmental protections in place so that they can contribute to the economy positively. So there are folks who drive this economy who want this as well, not just the green hippies.
We're here here too. Thank you for that. I really appreciate being here. I especially want to give a thank you to all of the folks who came to help us make this press conference successful. Thank you so much for being here, and for all the folks from the media, if you're willing to take some time to talk to some of our folks who aren't always at the Capitol, please do, and the rest of us will be around for a little bit as well. So thank you.